You have to consider over time plastic gets brittle. So in the long run, it may be better just to replace the whole valve cover and get new seals with the new valve cover. But if you do want to go ahead and replace the seals, this is how you're going to do it. In my opinion, do not attempt this unless you have a drill press and also a well ventilated area. And as always, wear safety glasses and hand protection like gloves, and you want to probably have some kind of a mask that filters out particles. This is the drill press I used, and for proof of concept, what I did is I used a keyhole saw, the same size as one of the seals I drilled into a 2x4, and the seal fits in perfect. This is the keyhole saw kit I have. I got it from Harbor Freight Tools. What I bought was 6 of the Altima 2.5 liter V6 Sparkplug tube seals, because they don't make them for the 4-cylinder. You have to use the 6-cylinder, which they are removable. Disconnect the negative battery cable. In preparation for removing the valve cover, the first task is for each cylinder remove the electrical connector for the coil-on plug. Then remove all four coil-on plugs. Then remove the bolts that secure the wiring harness to the intake manifold. Remove the 4 electrical connectors from the sensor. They have a tab at the top. You push in, you just pull the sensor back. One is the ECT sensor, which is a coolant temperature. The other one is the fly-by-wire for the throttle, and the camshaft position sensor, and probably something like a map, which is maximum absolute pressure for the manifold. Then you have to disconnect the wire looming from the intake manifold or any brackets. This type of connector, you can just take a pair of needle nose pliers and push the terminals together and push it right back out through the hole. Then pull the wiring harness back and disconnect the wiring harness from the side of the engine too. You have to disconnect the PCV tube from the intake manifold to the valve cover. I'm breaking the tube loose with a pair of pliers. Removing the clamp from the other end. There's also another breather tube that has to be removed from the valve cover. Remove the hose. All these hoses have dried out. They're almost like PVC piping. They're not rubbery or bendable anymore. Remove all the valve cover bolts. Break the valve cover loose. Now we're getting to the fun part. And there's a camshaft position sensor. And the way they implement this, it sort of works the same way as the distributor of the old days worked. Something you want to watch out for that I didn't realize, and that's at the PCV valve. It's on the back left. It's the tube, the first tube that I disconnected. The PCV valve, it's plastic. It broke in half. I didn't even know it. And luckily, none of it dropped into the top end when I lifted the valve cover off. But that's something you want to check on. These are the Altima V6 Sparkplug tube seals, and that's 2 of them together. So these are the seals that have to be removed from the inside of the valve cover, and they're glued in, and then they've also got it stamped in with a plastic ring. And I'm trying out one of the seals on the one of the spark plug tubes. And the spark plug tubes. As you can see, all the tubes have oil in the bottom. And this is the broken PCV valve, and you can see that some of the parts are small. If they dropped in the top end, you might not notice it. Unscrew what's left of the PCV valve. So along with a new valve cover gasket, you probably want to get a new PCV valve. So I tried to use a seal puller and it's impossible. That would be really nice if I could just use a seal puller and pull the seals out, but they're, like I said, they're glued in and they're stamped in with a piece of plastic ring. This is one that I tried to use a seal puller on. So what I did is I made a jig to hold the valve cover steady while I drill. Here I am at my drill press. Here's the very first seal I started to drill out. Doesn't look too bad, does it? You can break that ridge away with a pair of needle nose pliers. And there's the second seal I'm drilling out. Here's a seal that I drilled out. There's a seal that I drilled out, and a good seal side by side. Safety goggles and gloves are a must. For proof of concept, I used the Harbor Freight hole cutter set, and I selected one that was the same size as the seal for the valve cover. And there's a big difference cutting into wood and cutting into plastic. For one thing, the wood, you basically get a perfectly round circle, and the seal went in perfect. You know, it was just the right tension. You know, just like putting a seal in. You know, it was about just like that. But you'll find when you cut into plastic, you're going to get friction, and the hole's not going to be completely round. And also, like I mentioned before, I don't know if I mentioned it before or not, but this puts off one heck of a really noxious fume while it's cutting. And I'd highly recommend doing this in a really well ventilated area. Some of the holes you're going to have to do some cutting away with, like snapping off pieces of flashing with a pair of needle nose pliers. You can also use a grinder to grind away some of the the excess plastic. I would recommend using something a little bigger like the Dremel tool that I have. Here's the completed valve cover. I've cleaned it with gunk and I think some carburetor cleaner, and I'm removing the old gasket. Q-tips and shop air are good to clean out in recesses after you've applied either carburetor cleaner or gunk. You want to make sure you clean out all the recesses. That's something that can really ruin a new gasket installation real quick, is to have carburetor cleaner or whatever you use to clean the old gasket material off if it goes down like a screw thread or any kind of a recess. And then when you put the screw in, it pushes it all out, and then the gasket won't seal because it's all oily and you know, whatever, water, uh, oil, gasket cleaner. It's not good. Here's the new gasket. So to drive the new valve cover gaskets in, I'm using a 1 7/16 socket, I believe it is. What I found is that if you have the gasket, or the seal, I guess, if you have the seal perfectly in the bore for the where it goes into the spark plug tube. Sometimes when you tap it in, one side will pop up. Well, I found out it's due to the non concentric cutting of the seal seat, and from the heat, it distorts it, or you get some plastic that sort of welds to the side from the heat. You could take a grinder and grind some of that away, but you have to be really careful you don't grind too much and make the seal leak, or the seal. And what I found is if you get that where you're tapping it in with the socket or whatever you use, a piece of PVC or whatever, the side that pops up, it doesn't go in. One side will go in. If you take the side that pops up and put that in a little bit, so that's in, it's not parallel, it's not level, but that side is in a little bit further. When you drive it in, the other side will fall in line, and the seal will go in perfect. And there's all the seals replaced, and also it has a new PCV valve. I also replaced all the breather tubes. They were hard as rock. I guess all the heat from the engine and everything over 17, 18 years dried them out a little bit. So now you want to clean the top of the head, the gasket surface on it, and this is what I use is I like carburetor cleaner, and I have plastic razor blades that I use because they won't you. It's the top of the head is aluminum, so you want to be careful. You don't want to scar it. Make a cut. Gouge it. So I use carburetor cleaner, and I use, like I said, a plastic razor blade. There's a couple other tools you can use, and one thing you want to try to avoid is when you're cleaning the surface, whatever you use to clean. If you use any kind of a liquid, it's going to go down inside the thread, the bolt holes, And then when you put the valve cover on, you screw the bolt holes on. When you screw the bolts in on the valve cover, it's going to pull all that or push all that fluid out, and it's going to ruin your your gasket, your new gasket install. So it's a good idea to go through and with shop air or something and blow out all the screw recesses. And I put some silicone gasket. I think it's Forma gasket in places where when I removed the valve cover, I noticed that they had factory gasket sealer. Well, that's it. And I haven't taken the Altima in for its safety inspection or gotten a 30-day tag, but I have been driving it around through the back streets where I live. You know, nothing really, just miles, a few miles, and I mean it appears to be it runs real good. I don't think there's any kind of an air leak, and you know, from the seals, and there doesn't seem to be any kind of a gasket leak, oil gasket leak. It was really, really bad when I bought the car. I mean, it was just, it looked like somebody poured a quart of oil over the top of the motor.